Let's look at a few more examples of this intensification of anti-immigrant legislation and enforcement. Another example will take us to the state level. We'll look at an example from Arizona, the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhood Act. This was an act that's it's commonly known as Arizona SB 1070. Okay, SB stands for Senate Bill. SB 1070 basically this once again got local law enforcement involved in enforcing immigration. All right, only now basically they can approach any individual and basically force them to prove that they are either a citizen or a legal resident. Right, they have to show paperwork. Right, you could have just an average cop or a sheriff approach somebody because they think that they are an illegal immigrant, right? No proof or anything, but just up to their own discretion. They could approach them and say, "Hey, show me your paperwork, right? Prove to me that you are either a citizen or a legal resident, right? And if you couldn't, then you're going to get arrested." Right? And so this requires legal residents to carry around their documentation with them everywhere that they go, and it also exposes them to harassment, right? As well as U.S. citizens and undocumented immigrants as well. And so this is going to make it a misdemeanor, a state crime, if you don't have your documentation, right? And so it's criminalizing immigrants. And so they'll go to jail for this, right? Also, if immigrants are found to be working illegally, then that is also going to be a state crime because of this law. Okay, so the law basically gets local law enforcement involved in enforcing immigration, and it also criminalizes illegal immigrants by making it a misdemeanor, right? At the state level. Okay, because I mean, yes, it's already against the law at the federal level, but this law is making it a state crime, and that's a difference, right? Because now the state is enforcing immigration. And so there's penalties for immigrants under this law, SB 1070, as well as penalties for employers. All right, an employer could be charged with a felony for hiring illegal immigrants. And so this is all to try to deter illegal immigration. All right. But this law, SB 1070, is going to get a lot of criticism, and you're also going to see resistance coming from the Obama administration against this law. Okay. And ultimately, the law would be brought before the Supreme Court, and it would be found that states do not have the right to enforce immigration laws. Only the federal government can enforce immigration laws. And so basically, what that means is they can't make it a state crime. All right. And so it can't be a state crime for you to be an illegal immigrant or to be working if you're an illegal immigrant, right? That's the problem, all right? So yes, the 287G program allows law enforcement to be involved in working with ICE to enforce immigration laws, but states can't make it a state crime, okay, for you to be an illegal immigrant, all right? And so that aspect of SB 1070 was stopped. But the aspect of local law enforcement being able to ask for people's documentation, that aspect continued. Okay, the Supreme Court allowed for that. All right, so you still have that issue of racial profiling and harassment involved with SB 1070. Another example of this intensification of anti-immigrant legislation is the Birthright Citizenship Act of 2011. Now, this act did not pass, but if it did, it would have taken away citizenship for children who were born in the United States, but whose parents were undocumented immigrants. As of right now, of course, if parents who are undocumented have a child in the United States, that child is a citizen of the U.S. But the Birthright Citizenship Act would have taken away citizenship for these so-called anchor babies. That's the term that was used by those who were anti-immigrant. They were calling them anchor babies because basically these babies who were born in the U.S., who are U.S. citizens, but whose parents were undocumented workers, they were making it where these undocumented immigrants could come back into the country and re-enter the country because they had relatives here. Okay, and so this law did not pass, the Birthright Citizenship Act, but it's another example of this intensification of anti-immigrant legislation at the state and federal level. So we've talked about how there's this pattern of when the economy is not doing well, you're going to see all this anti-immigrant sentiment. Well, the economy is going to take a big dive in 2008 when we entered the Great Recession. Okay, and so the Great Recession, basically, a lot of people are going to lose jobs. There's going to be massive unemployment. People are going to be losing their homes because of the housing crisis. And so let's take a look at the effect of the Great Recession on Latinx workers. All right, so this effect is going to be, like for most people, massive unemployment. All right, for those who will keep their jobs, a lot of them will see a reduction in their work hours. Okay, and so you don't get as much hours as before, so it's going to be harder for you to pay your rent and get what you need, buy the things that you need. You're also going to see some violations of the minimum wage laws and overtime laws during the Great Recession for Latinx workers, right? Particularly for undocumented workers. And so these workers, basically, they would be paid less than minimum wage in some cases, but they wouldn't say anything because they were afraid that they'd lose their jobs if they did. Okay, so you have some employers taking advantage of these workers during the Great Recession. You also have some workers being forced to do overtime but weren't getting paid for overtime, again, because they were scared that they would be fired if they protested. Okay, and so you have this effect on Latinx workers. You also have an effect on immigrants, right? Latinx immigrants who are undocumented, many of them working in the construction industry. So during the Great Recession, you're going to see a massive decrease in construction projects, and so a lot of these construction workers will be out of work. Okay, so you're going to have a massive effect on undocumented workers because of this. And so ultimately, you're going to see a lot of Latinx families losing their homes during the Great Recession, right? And part of the reason for this is because they were given subprime loans. And basically, these loans were very risky. They had a variable interest rate, meaning that their interest rate could change, right? It could just change. Like instead of having a steady interest rate, of say like I don't know 5% or something like that, their interest rate could dramatically increase, right? And this happened. And so a lot of Latinx as well as African Americans were targeted for these subprime loans. They were given these loans. And basically, that's the only way that they were going to get a loan was they were given these risky loans, right? And so they had to pay these high interest rates. And so when the Great Recession happened and people lost their jobs or they had less hours at work, they were unable to pay these high interest rates. And so they lost their homes. Their homes would get foreclosed. And that's why a lot of individuals lost their home during this time, right? Because of these subprime loans that had high interest rates. They could just change, right? They could just dramatically increase.